Hello, my name is Darren Thomas, and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to be looking at different types of angles that you commonly find in geometry. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first set of angles that we're going to talk about are called, if you look closely here, they're called adjacent angles. Adjacent. And adjacent angles are basically when you have angles that share a common side and have the same origin. So our origin here is this guy right here in the middle. I guess I can give him a name. We're going to call this guy X. And so one example of an adjacent angle would be right here between angle A and angle alpha, angle beta, And so you can see they share a common endpoint, or you can say a common origin, and they share a common side, which is this guy right here. This line right here, this side right here, and that is what makes it adjacent. Adjacent just means next to each other. And so other examples of adjacent pairs besides alpha beta, of course, this is Greek terms, alpha beta. You also have beta gamma. That'll be another example. Gamma and delta. And of course, delta and alpha, so alpha and delta, however you want to say it. That's kind of how it works out. So these are all examples of adjacent angles. These are angles that are right next to each other. They share a common side, and they have the same origin, or you can also say the same endpoint. That is how that works. Now, something else that we need to explain here is this idea of vertical angles. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. So this is vertical angles here. And now when you're dealing with vertical angles, the rules are slightly different. They share a common origin, or a common endpoint, if you will, and they're opposite. So this time they're not next to each other. In other words, they don't share a side. Adjacent angles, they share a side. With vertical angles, they don't share a side, but they still have that common origin. So, in other words, the vertical angles in this particular example would be angle, let me change the color here. So, angle A and angle gamma would be considered adjacent. Angle beta and angle delta would be considered adjacent. However, angle alpha and angle beta will be considered, let me back up. Angle alpha and angle gamma will be considered vertical angles. Angle beta and angle delta will be considered vertical angles. Angle alpha and angle beta will be considered adjacent. And of course, delta and gamma will be considered adjacent as well, as long as other combinations. But this is slightly different. Now, the important thing we need to measure, to speak of is this. They have another unique trait is that they also have the same measurement, and they're also congruent. So these angles are congruent. So to make this as concrete as possible, if the measure of angle alpha is 100, that means that the measure of angle gamma is also going to be 100, because they are vertical angles. They are opposite of each other, and they share a common endpoint, a common origin, And so that is how this works in this particular situation when we are dealing with this. And so again, if you're familiar with the rules for complementary and supplementary angles, you can also extract more information from this. And we're going to talk about that more in a second, but I just want to give you a teaser. So if angle alpha is 100 and angle gamma is 100, well, let's see here. When something shares the same side, that means measure beta is going to be 80. And if this guy is 80, that means delta is 80. Again, we're going to learn more about supplementary and complementary angles in a few moments, but all these rules are working together to try to help you to decipher exactly what are the measures of various angles when you're dealing with a plane like this. So let's go ahead and move on now to our next point. Okay, and I guess I should go back here and explain this. And so, talking about supplementary and complementary angles. So when we're talking about supplementary angles, so supplementaries Supplementary versus complementary. When we're talking about supplementary, we're talking about two angles that add up to 180 degrees. So in other words, it's a straight line. So to remember this, supplementary means straight. That's the little secret that I picked up from studying different mathematics and with different teachers. So two angles that add up to 180 degrees. So if I had to go back here to my previous example, you can see right here, angle gamma and angle beta, they add up to 180 degrees. They share this straight line right here, and on gamma side right here is 100 degrees, and over here is the other 80, and you can see that nice straight line there. You know, we're assuming these are perpendicular, obviously, and that right there, my friends, is a supplementary angle because these two are working together. So your knowledge of supplementary angles can help you again to calculate and to determine the sides of different angles. That's what we're talking about here. Now, when we're talking about complementary angles, we're talking about when two angles add up to 90 degrees. So supplementary means they add up to 180, and complementary means they add up to, 90. That's kind of how it works out there. And so to remember complementary, we like to use the word, if it's the corner, it's complementary. So you can see right here in this graph right here, I don't have any measurements, but you know that angle 1 and angle 2, they're going to add up to 90 degrees because this is a nice right angle right here. So this is an example of a complementary angle in this particular example here. And so no matter what their measure is, it's going to add up to 90 degrees. So the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is going to add up to 90 degrees. And that's how this works. And so this is a very, very practical rule to help you to try to decipher things, as I've already mentioned several times. So let's go ahead and go back and review and then conclude this particular video. So in this video, we learned about several different types of angles that you might encounter when you're dealing with a particular plane such as this. And so we learned about adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are when they have the same origin or the same endpoint and they share a side. So right here, alpha and beta share a side, alpha and delta share a side, beta and gamma share a side, and gamma and delta share a side. And they all have the same endpoint. They all have the same origin. And so when they're next to each other, they're considered adjacent. Next, we talked about vertical angles. Vertical angles is when they share, of course, the same endpoint or the same origin, whatever you want to call it, but they're also opposite to each other. So in this example, alpha and gamma are opposite to each other, beta and delta are opposite to each other. And so they're considered vertical angles in this time. And another thing that's unique about vertical angles is that when they're opposite to each other like this, in this kind of a situation, they're also congruent, or they have the same measure of their angle. So that is also another tip on how to survive and to try to decipher these mysterious things that we find in these planes sometimes. And the last thing that we talked about was supplementary and complementary angles. A supplementary angle, think straight, is two angles that add up to 180 degrees, or when you have a straight line, if you will, you can know that whatever's coming off that line is going to add up to 180 degrees. And also with complementary, you're talking about when angles, normally two angles, they add up to 90 degrees. So the secret to remember supplementary angles is supplementary means straight, as in the straight angle, 180 degrees, and complementary means corner, like what you commonly find when you're dealing with a right angle. So, my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Thank you for listening and watching, and you take care.